Ma'am, step away from the vehicle and keep your hands where I can see them.
Why? I am Judge Elena Brooks. I'm asking you to verify before you put your hands on me.
Ma'am, this vehicle matches a stolen vehicle alert. Put your hands behind your back.
I'm not refusing. I'm asking you to verify
You
before
can explain all that
detain me.
later. Right now you're being detained.
Elena Brooks had one foot on her driveway and her keys still in her hand when Officer Kevin Rourke yanked her wrists behind her back. He didn't ask her to wait while he verified anything. He didn't check her plate twice. He didn't even look toward the front door she'd just parked in front of. He pressed her against the side of her own gray Audi and told her, like it was already settled, that the car was stolen, that she was being detained for auto theft, and that her trying to explain was resisting. Elena didn't raise her voice. She didn't move fast. She kept repeating the same simple request. Run the plate again, confirm her ID, call dispatch, do the basic checks. She told him she lived there, right in that house, and that verification would take less time than the handcuffs. Rourke treated calm like disrespect. The cuffs clicked shut anyway. Then he walked her, still in her work clothes, still holding herself together, past her own mailbox and into the backseat of his cruiser as if the neighborhood didn't exist. And the neighborhood did exist. A woman across the street, Mara Ellis, had been dragging 2 grocery bags from her trunk when she froze mid-step. She watched the cuffs go on, watched Elena's head stay level, watched the officer move with the kind of confidence that didn't match the situation. Mara didn't start filming because she wanted drama. She started filming because she knew what happened when the only record came from one uniform. A few houses down, a man walking his dog slowed to a stop at the corner and stared, confused in the way people get when something can't be happening right in front of them. Another neighbor cracked their front door and lingered half hidden behind it, not sure whether to step in or step away. The street was quiet, but it wasn't empty. And Elena understood in real time that this wasn't just a mistake anymore. It was becoming a story someone would later try to explain. Before we go on, tell us where you're watching from in the comments, your country, your state, whatever you feel like sharing. And if you're here for stories where someone stays composed, evidence gets preserved, and accountability actually lands, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Now rewind, because the way this started mattered. It was a Tuesday afternoon in Westfield Heights, Colorado, the kind of neighborhood that ran on routines. School pickup traffic, the same dog walkers, porch lights coming on early in winter. Elena had spent the day on the bench doing what she always did, listening, weighing facts, writing decisions that depended on procedure being followed correctly. She was 49, a state appellate judge, the kind of person trained to separate feelings from facts under pressure. She'd been careful of her whole career, not just in court, but in the way she moved through the world. Calm voice, clear words, no sudden motions when a situation could be misread. When she turned onto her street, she noticed a patrol SUV behind her. That by itself wasn't unusual. In Westfield Heights, patrol cars cruised slow, proactive, relying heavily on alerts and scanners that were supposed to make policing efficient. The problem was what people did after the alert. Elena pulled into her driveway like normal. She parked in front of her own garage, the front of her house right there in full view. She reached for her bag, already thinking about dinner and emails she hadn't answered. Then the SUV rolled in and stopped behind her in a way that blocked her out. Officer Rourke got out quickly, one hand near his belt, posture rigid. He didn't start with a question. He started with certainty. He said her Audi matched a stolen vehicle alert and told her she needed to comply. Elena stayed inside at first, window lowered enough to talk, hands visible. She didn't challenge his right to check. She challenged his refusal to verify. She told him he could run the plate again. She told him her license and registration were right there. She told him dispatch could confirm the registered owner and the address within minutes. This was the fork in the road, the easy off-ramp that should have ended everything. But Rourke didn't take it. He kept talking like the alert was proof, and her explanations were excuses. Elena's voice stayed steady, the way it did in court when someone tried to bluff past the record. She asked for the basic steps, the basic confirmation, the basics that protected everyone. Rourke read that steadiness as defiance. He ordered her out of the vehicle. Elena complied, slowly, carefully, narrating her movements with the caution of someone who knew how quickly sudden could be turned into threatening. She stood near her door, shoulders squared but not aggressive, and repeated the same request. Verify the plate, verify the ID, confirm the address. Rourke moved closer instead of checking. He reframed her insistence on verification as non-compliance. He treated her questions as obstruction. He used the language that made escalation sound justified. And then he put her in cuffs. The shocking part wasn't that a stolen vehicle alert existed. Those alerts were wrong all the time. Bad reads, outdated entries, clerical errors. The shocking part was that Elena gave him multiple clean ways to confirm the truth, and he chose control instead. Because once he decided she was resisting, the facts stopped being the point. And that's how a judge ended up sitting in the back of a cruiser in her own driveway, while the officer still hadn't done the one thing that would have settled it: pick up the radio and verify. Elena stayed in the back seat of the cruiser with her hands cuffed behind her. She sat upright because the cuffs made it hard to shift without scraping her wrists. She kept her breathing slow and her voice steady. Outside, Rourke didn't treat it like a quick mistake and stop. He treated it like a scene he needed to control. He walked between the Audi and his SUV, looking into the windows and checking his in-car computer. He still hadn't done the basic steps Elena had asked for at the start. Confirm the plate properly, confirm the registered owner, confirm the address. Elena asked more than once for him to verify her ID and run the plate again. She kept it simple. She didn't insult him. She didn't raise her voice. She stayed on process. Rourke answered by repeating his claim that the vehicle was stolen and framing her talking as resistance. He didn't open the door to take her license from her wallet. He didn't ask her to point out where the registration was. He kept the encounter locked in his version of events. Across the street, Mara Ellis watched from her driveway. She'd been unloading groceries when she saw the handcuffs go on. She didn't rush toward the officer. She didn't shout. She just held her phone up and recorded what she could. Elena in the back seat, Rourke moving around. The time passing with no verification. A neighbor down the sidewalk, Andre Salazar, stopped with his dog and tried to vouch for Elena from a distance. He didn't walk up aggressively. He kept his hands visible and spoke in a normal tone. He tried to tell Rourke that Elena lived right there and that the officer had the wrong person. Rourke shut him down immediately. He told Andre to step back and stay out of it. When Andre didn't move fast enough, Rourke repeated it louder and gestured toward the sidewalk like it was a boundary line. Andre backed up. He didn't leave. He stayed where he was, watching, because it felt wrong to disappear. That was the pattern of the next half hour. Elena asking for basic verification, Rourke refusing to take the fastest path to the truth, and neighbors watching it happen. Time mattered here. If the stop was truly about a stolen vehicle alert, the fastest outcome would be verification. If it wasn't, time worked as pressure, keeping Elena restrained long enough to make the stop feel serious, long enough to make bystanders doubt what they saw. Rourke kept stretching the time. He made radio traffic that sounded like he was seeking confirmation, but the way he moved didn't match urgency. He didn't act like someone trying to clear an innocent person quickly. He acted like someone trying to protect the decision he'd already made. Elena stayed controlled, but the humiliation was real. She was in her own driveway, in a neighborhood where she knew people recognized her car, her routine, her face. She kept her expression neutral because she understood how easily emotion could be used against her later. Mara's recording captured small details that mattered. How long Elena stayed cuffed, how often Rourke ignored the simplest verification options, and how he reacted when other people tried to speak. At around the 30-minute mark, another patrol vehicle turned onto the street. It parked with less force. No hard stop, no dramatic angle. A different kind of presence. Officer Dana Kim stepped out. She took in the whole scene in one scan. The Audi in a residential driveway, Elena in cuffs in the back seat, neighbors standing back but watching. Kim walked to Rourke first and listened to his summary. He presented it like a clean story. Stolen car alert, driver uncooperative, detention necessary. Kim didn't argue with him in front of the street. She did something more basic and more damaging to his narrative. She verified. She looked at the plate herself. She checked the VIN through the windshield. Then she called dispatch in a straightforward way: registered owner, address match, status of the alert. Dispatch cleared it quickly. The alert didn't apply the way Rourke claimed. Whether it was a misread plate, a stale entry, or an incorrect match, it was the kind of error that should have been caught early before anyone was cuffed. Kim walked back to the cruiser and opened the rear door. She spoke to Elena in a respectful, professional tone and told her she was being released. She removed the cuffs. Elena stepped out slowly and flexed her hands. Her wrists were marked. She didn't dramatize it. She didn't need to. Rourke stood off to the side, rigid. His face read as annoyed more than relieved. He didn't look like someone who just prevented a crime. He looked like someone whose authority had been checked. Kim kept it procedural. She acknowledged the mismatch and moved to end the stop cleanly. She didn't give Elena a speech. She didn't give Rourke a lecture. She ended the detention because the facts didn't support it. Elena's response stayed disciplined. She didn't threaten. She didn't posture. She did what she'd spent her career doing. She made sure the record would be clear. She gave her full name again. She asked for the incident number. She asked that the reason for the detention and the time in cuffs be documented. She made it clear there were recordings, dash cam, body cam, and neighbor video, and that she expected them preserved. Then she said one thing that landed because it wasn't emotional. It was a principle. She told them that if verification was available, refusing to verify wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. She walked towards her front door without rushing, without collapsing, without giving anyone the satisfaction of seeing her shaken. Behind her, neighbors kept their phones down but didn't pretend it hadn't happened. Kim returned to her vehicle. Rourke stayed where he was for a moment longer than necessary, like he needed time to reassemble his story. In the hours after she was released, Elena didn't treat it like an embarrassing moment to forget. She treated it like evidence. She took clear photos of her wrists before the marks faded. She wrote down a timeline while it was fresh. When the stop started, when the cuffs went on, how long she sat in the cruiser, when backup arrived, and when she was released. She noted what she could. Unit numbers, names, and the exact language the officer kept using to justify the detention. She also did something most people don't think to do in the moment. She secured the outside recordings. She contacted the neighbors who had filmed and asked them to keep the original files, unedited, with timestamps, not for social media. For the record, one neighbor backed the video up that same night. Another saved it in 2 places after hearing how often footage disappeared once a complaint started. By the next morning, she retained a civil rights attorney. The lawyer didn't start with anger. She started with preservation. She sent formal notices to the department demanding that body cam, dash cam, dispatch audio, CAD logs, and any license plate reader data tied to the stop be preserved. She requested the stop documentation and the basis for the stolen vehicle claim, including the source of the alert and whether it was active, stale, or misread. At the same time, Elena kept her public behavior disciplined. She didn't do a victory lap. She didn't make big statements. She understood that public emotion gets used to distract from facts. The department's first response was predictable. Vague language, minimized time, and heavy emphasis on safety procedures. They tried to frame the outcome as quick and routine, as if cuffs were just a temporary inconvenience. But the neighbor videos undermined that framing. They showed the driveway and the house in the background. They showed how long she stayed cuffed. They showed the officer refusing the fastest verification steps while repeating language that turned calm questions into resistance. They showed how the officer treated witnesses as interference instead of help. Once that footage circulated locally, the story didn't rely on anyone's interpretation. People could see the sequence. That's when the internal review started moving. Internal Affairs pulled dispatch audio, CAD timestamps, and the officer's report. They compared what the officer said he believed with what the system actually returned and when it returned it. They looked closely at the key question. If verification was available, why was it delayed until another officer arrived? Then the review widened beyond the single stop. They looked for similar incidents tied to the same officer. Stops based on alerts, quick escalation, delayed verification, repeated resisting language, and complaints that previously ended with no meaningful correction. The goal wasn't to prove someone was bad. The goal was to see whether the same pattern showed up again and again, and it did. The case shifted from one humiliating mistake to a documented problem. How often the officer escalated first and checked later, how often basic confirmation steps were skipped, and how consistently the paperwork tried to justify what the video contradicted. By the end of that week, Elena's situation had become bigger than her driveway. Not because she made it bigger with speeches, because the timeline, the footage, and the department's own records made it impossible to keep small. Once Internal Affairs confirmed the stop wasn't just sloppy but unsupported, Elena's case moved from complaint to claim. Her attorney filed a formal notice against the city and department. The goal wasn't a public argument. It was to force disclosure. Bodycam, dashcam, dispatch audio, CAD logs, plate reader hits, training records, and the officer's prior stop history tied to similar alerts. The city tried the standard containment move. They framed it as a single incident that ended once a second officer verified the car. They leaned on careful language about split-second decisions and officer safety, even though the stop had lasted long enough for multiple verification chances. Elena's side didn't argue feelings. They argued sequence. They laid out the timeline. Handcuffs first, verification later. 30-plus minutes of detention in a residential driveway with basic facts available. A resisting label applied to calm requests for standard checks. Then the rapid confirmation the moment a more experienced officer treated it like a verification problem. That timeline made the case hard to shrink. Because the legal issue wasn't just the initial alert, it was the decision to treat an unverified alert as certainty, then punish the person for asking the officer to confirm it. As the lawsuit advanced, discovery pressure grew. The department could either produce clean footage and logs, or explain why they couldn't. Either option carried risk. If the records existed, they would show the choices made in real time. If records were missing, that raised a different kind of alarm. Meanwhile, Internal Affairs findings widened. The review didn't just look at Elena's stop report, it looked at the officer's pattern. Stops with similar escalation, similar language, similar delays in verification. Complaints that had been minimized before. Supervisors who had let it slide. That mattered because it changed the posture of the entire case. A single mistaken stop could be defended as error. A repeated pattern suggested training failures, supervision failures, and policy violations that the department tolerated until the wrong person got caught in it. The city's tone shifted once that pattern became documentable. Settlement talks started. The city explored resolving it without trial, not out of generosity, but because trials create permanent records. Trials put policies, footage, and internal discipline decisions under a microscope. Elena's side pushed for two things at the same time: compensation and reforms. Money addressed the harm, but reforms addressed the repeat. The negotiations focused on measurable changes, mandatory verification steps before handcuffing on alert-based stops, supervisor review triggers for resisting language, audits of stolen vehicle stops, and Bodycam compliance enforcement with real consequences. The city also had to deal with the public side without turning it into theater. Local attention kept pressure on, but Elena didn't feed it. She stayed disciplined and let the process work, knowing that credibility grows when you don't exaggerate. By the end of this phase, the case was no longer just about what happened in a driveway. It was about whether a department could keep relying on alerts and authority while ignoring verification, and whether the system only corrected itself when someone with resources forced it to. The case ended without a trial. The city agreed to a major payout and, more importantly, signed off on changes the department couldn't quietly ignore later. Clearer verification steps for alert-based stops, tighter rules on when cuffs could be used, mandatory supervisor review when resisting was claimed, and periodic audits to catch patterns early. Rourke didn't get to frame it as a misunderstanding anymore. Internal findings followed him: discipline, retraining, and closer supervision at minimum, with his future in patrol effectively narrowed by the record attached to his name. Lena didn't celebrate in public. She took part of the settlement and created a small legal support fund, covering consultation fees, filing costs, and help for people who'd been stopped, searched, or charged based on weak justification and had no money to fight back. The point wasn't revenge. It was making sure the next person didn't have to be a judge to be believed. Elena kept judging cases the same way she always had, focused on facts, process, and restraint. But privately, she turned what happened into something useful. Her legal support fund helped people who would normally be pressured into dropping complaints or taking bad deals because they couldn't afford a fight. Quiet help, real impact. And that's what made the story stick. It wasn't about one person winning an argument. It was about a system being forced, by records, not rumors, to admit what it did. So here's the question. If you were Elena, would you have stayed quiet to protect your peace, or pushed until the paperwork changed? And if you were a neighbor, would you have filmed, spoken up, or stayed inside? Drop your answer in the comments, share the story with someone who needs it, and subscribe for more real, grounded stories where accountability actually lands.
For the record, I am Deputy Jamal Porter with the Sheriff's Office. This is a county-issued vehicle. I do not consent to a search of this SUV.
For our safety, we're going to make sure there's nothing in this vehicle that can hurt anybody.
You haven't run the plate.
We'll sort all that out afterwards. Right now, we're clearing the vehicle.
Did you run the plate on this vehicle before you put your hands on my deputy in his SUV?
Ma'am, we intended to verify after we...
That's a yes or no question, officer.
No, ma'am.
So to be clear for the record, you detained a deputy sheriff and searched a county vehicle without consent, without verification, and without probable cause.
The county-issued Ford Explorer sat on the shoulder like it had been abandoned, hazard lights blinking against a flat, beige horizon. Two city patrol cars boxed it in from behind at an angle that screamed felony stop, not traffic stop. Deputy Jamal Porter stood beside his driver's door with his palms open and visible, elbows locked, shoulders still. He kept his voice steady while he explained again that he was law enforcement, that his duty ID was on him, that the SUV was county property and marked as such. The officers did not slow down. One of them moved in close, crowding Porter's space. The other scanned the cabin like he expected a gun to rise out of the center console. Their hands hovered near their belts, their posture rigid, their tone sharp. They ordered Porter away from the door. Porter complied, stepping back exactly as instructed, careful and deliberate. Then the escalation crossed a line. One officer seized Porter's arm and pivoted him toward the rear quarter panel, guiding him with pressure instead of words. Porter did not resist. He did not flinch. He kept his hands high and let the officer place him where he wanted, even as passing drivers slowed and phones appeared in windows. A woman in an SUV rolled by at a crawl, camera pointed. A pickup on the far lane drifted to get a better angle. The officers noticed, but it didn't change their rhythm. If anything, it tightened it. Porter tried one more time to direct them towards the county identifiers they were ignoring. The agency markings on the rear hatch, the government fleet tags, the internal equipment that didn't belong to a civilian driver. The officers kept treating it like a story. They ordered him to stay put. They told him they were going to search the vehicle. Porter stated calmly and clearly that he did not consent and that they needed a lawful basis. They answered by moving anyway. And in that moment, out on that quiet stretch of Pima County Highway, the power chess game was already being filmed from 3 different angles. Quick thing, tell where you're watching from in the comments. City, state, or country. And if you're into stories where accountability catches up to people who skip procedure, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now, rewind, because this didn't start like a viral incident. It started like a normal drive until assumptions replaced protocol. Earlier that afternoon, Porter had been doing what he'd done for 14 years, moving through a routine assignment with quiet efficiency. He wasn't chasing attention. He wasn't looking for conflict. He had a county schedule to follow and paperwork to deliver, an ordinary chain of tasks that meant miles on the highway and minutes that mattered. The Explorer wasn't subtle. It carried county fleet markings. It carried the kind of wear that came from real work. Inside were the tools of a deputy's day, a vest secured in the back, a hard case for issued gear, and a folder of assignments that had been printed, stamped, and filed the way government offices still did it when they needed accountability and a paper trail. Porter drove the speed limit. He wasn't weaving. He wasn't riding anyone's bumper. He was just a black man in the driver's seat of an SUV that looked official, unless you decided it couldn't be. 2 Tucson City Patrol officers saw him from the opposite direction, turned around and tucked in behind him. At first, it looked like a standard follow. Then the distance closed. Then the lights came on. Porter did what he trained civilians to do during stops. He signaled, moved to the shoulder with plenty of room, and stopped in a controlled way. He lowered the window. He kept his hands where they could be seen. He waited. The first officer approached fast and tight, not wide and cautious. He didn't start with a clear explanation. He started with control, commands, not context. His partner hung back, angled toward the passenger side, scanning. Porter responded the way a professional responded when he knew the stakes of misunderstanding. He identified himself. He indicated he was a deputy. He made it clear he had agency identification and could produce it. The officers did not do the most basic thing that would have prevented what came next. They did not verify what they were looking at before they treated it like a threat. No audible plate check. No pause to confirm the vehicle belonged to the county. No radio call that matched the intensity of their posture. It was the kind of shortcut that only happened when someone decided they already knew the answer. The first officer demanded driver documents. Porter moved slowly, narrating his movements the way trained people did when they wanted everyone to go home safe. He told them where his wallet was. He offered his duty ID. He tried to bridge the gap between what they assumed and what was true. The first officer rejected the bridge. In his body language, the message was simple. The identification Porter offered didn't count yet. Not because it wasn't valid, because it didn't fit the story the officer had already written. The second officer stepped closer and asked questions that didn't align with the traffic stop. He asked who the vehicle belonged to in a way that suggested the answer was already suspicious. He asked where Porter got it, as if county fleet departments handed out Explorers like rental cars. Porter remained calm. He repeated the facts without raising his voice. He pointed out the markings. He referenced the agency. He told them there was paperwork inside that matched the vehicle and the assignment. The first officer interpreted composure as defiance. That was the oldest trick in street encounters. Turning calm into attitude, turning explanation into argument, turning a professional boundary into a reason to escalate. The order came to step out. Porter complied immediately. He opened the door slowly, stepped out, and closed it. He kept his hands visible. He turned his body slightly so no one could claim he moved suddenly. Even then, the officers kept pushing for dominance, not clarity. They repositioned him. They told him to face away. They instructed him to keep distance from the vehicle as if the SUV itself was a weapon. Porter understood the trap. If he protested, they could label him non-compliant. If he moved too quickly, they could claim fear. If he spoke too firmly, they could say he was aggressive. So he did the only thing that had ever protected people in moments like this. He stayed precise. He stated he was a deputy. He stated again that the vehicle was county issued. He stated that he did not consent to a search. The officers moved into the search anyway. And this was where the stop changed from questionable to dangerous. Not because Porter did anything wrong, but because the officers were now creating a justification in real time. They peered through windows. They tugged at the driver's handle. One of them leaned in and began scanning compartments. The other kept Porter positioned like a detainee, hand on his arm, body angled to block him from seeing too much. Porter watched the road, not the officers. That was how you stayed calm. You anchored on something neutral. The desert wind moved dust across the shoulder. Traffic hissed past in waves, and now more drivers were slowing. The officers noticed the cameras and did what people did when they realized they might have an audience. They became louder about how lawful they were being, even as they skipped the steps that proved it. Porter tried to keep the record clean. He clarified in a controlled tone that he was not resisting. He clarified he was cooperating. He clarified he did not consent. He made sure each piece of his compliance was visible and understandable, for the same reason civilians repeated themselves on Bodycam, because later, somebody would try to rewrite it. The first officer walked to the rear hatch and reached for it like he owned it. This was the moment where the entire stop balanced on a hinge, because in the back of that county SUV, behind a locked case and a neatly stacked folder, was the truth they could have confirmed in 60 seconds with a plate check, a radio call, or basic professional humility. The first officer opened the rear case. Inside was a county-issued vest with clear inventory markings. Next to it was a folder of assignments stamped with the sheriff's office seal. The officers paused. Their confidence dropped. What Porter had been saying from the start was now in their hands. Porter stayed still and kept his hands visible. He repeated that he was a deputy and that they could verify his identity immediately. He restated that he did not consent to the search. The first officer shifted into damage control. He started explaining his actions as safety, while avoiding the simple fact that they had not verified plates or agency ownership first. The second officer looked toward traffic. Phones were up. The stop was being filmed. The first officer asked for Porter's ID again. Porter provided it slowly and clearly. The second officer checked it, then radioed for a supervisor. While they waited, the search stopped expanding. The physical pressure on Porter eased, but they kept him positioned away from the vehicle, as if they could still frame the stop as justified. A sheriff's unit arrived. Captain Elena Vargas stepped out and recognized Porter immediately. She checked him quickly, then turned to the city officers and demanded their basis for the stop and search. They offered broad explanations. Vargas narrowed it to procedure. She confirmed they had not run a plate check before escalating. She confirmed they had not verified the county vehicle markings or Porter's ID before going hands-on. She confirmed they searched without consent and without a clear lawful basis. With cameras still recording, Vargas called Internal Affairs to respond to the scene. When IA arrived, Vargas summarized the facts on the shoulder. No clear reason stated, no verification before escalation, physical handling, and a non-consensual search that only ended after official sheriff's gear and paperwork were found. Then she made the consequence immediate. She ordered both officers detained pending investigation and had them placed in cuffs on scene. Porter remained composed. Vargas told him he had every right to file a formal complaint, and she treated it as misconduct, not confusion. The scene ended the way it should have started, with verification and paperwork. Internal Affairs documented everything on the shoulder. They collected the officers' names, badge numbers, and unit information. They noted the lack of a stated reason for the stop, the missed plate verification, the physical handling, and the non-consensual search. Porter gave a brief, factual statement. He listed the sequence. He identified himself early, offered duty ID, pointed out county markings, complied with instructions, and stated non-consent before the search. He kept it professional and complete. Captain Vargas ensured Porter was able to leave safely and that the county vehicle and equipment were accounted for. She also ensured bystander recordings were treated as evidence, not ignored. Within days, the incident spread online through short clips filmed by passing drivers. The public focus stayed on the same point. Escalation happened before verification. Porter filed a formal complaint. He requested dispatch logs, radio traffic, and any body camera footage. He documented the time, location, and the officer's actions in a standard report format. The investigation moved fast because the record was strong. Internal Affairs compared the timeline against CAD entries, radio calls, and video. The key procedural failures were clear. No plate check before escalation, no proper identification verification before going hands-on, and a search without consent or clear lawful basis. Both city officers were placed on administrative leave pending findings. Agency leadership held review meetings focused on interagency conduct and stop procedures. Training and supervision were flagged as part of the review, not just individual behavior. By the end of the initial review phase, the case was no longer treated as a misunderstanding. It was treated as misconduct, supported by video and documentation. Internal Affairs completed the formal review using the full record. Dispatch logs, radio traffic, body camera where available, and multiple bystander videos. The findings focused on sequence and legality. The officers escalated before verification, used physical control without a clear basis, and searched a county vehicle without consent or documented cause. The review noted that basic steps, plate check and identity confirmation, were available and ignored. The city placed both officers on restricted status while discipline moved forward. Their reports were compared to video and audio. The inconsistencies became part of the case, not a side issue. Captain Vargas submitted a separate supervisory memorandum through the sheriff's chain. It documented the operational risk of interagency stops handled without verification and flagged it as misconduct, not a training mistake. Porter met with county leadership and filed a full written statement for the record. He also requested preservation of all related footage and communications to prevent loss or deletion under routine retention. The city issued an internal notice reminding patrol units of required verification steps on stops involving government fleet vehicles and cross-agency personnel. Supervisors were directed to review stops that escalated without an initial plate check. Porter's complaint triggered a joint review between the city and county. They examined jurisdiction boundaries on that highway stretch, dispatch coordination, and how city units handled county fleet identifiers. The goal was to prevent the same failure chain from repeating. As the case moved beyond internal review, Porter was given formal options: continue only through administrative discipline, or pursue additional action through professional standards and legal channels. He chose to keep everything documented and handled through process, not public argument. By the time the first disciplinary decisions were drafted, the core point was locked in. The stop became a problem because procedure was skipped, and it stayed a problem because the officers tried to control the scene instead of confirming the facts. The disciplinary decisions were based on the same issue every reviewer kept returning to. The officers acted first and verified later. Internal Affairs recommended sustained findings on multiple violations tied to the stop, failure to establish and communicate a lawful reason, failure to verify plates and vehicle ownership before escalation, improper detention tactics, and an unlawful search without consent or documented cause. City command staff approved discipline. The officers were removed from patrol during the process. One was flagged for termination-level misconduct based on the total chain of decisions and the mismatch between report language and recorded video. The other faced severe suspension and mandatory retraining with a final warning status because their actions followed the same escalation path. Because the incident involved interagency harm and public exposure, the case also triggered a risk review. The city's legal office and the county's risk management unit opened a parallel track to assess liability. Porter was offered a formal route to seek remedy for the stop itself, not only the internal discipline. Porter kept his response procedural. He provided documentation, preserved records, and avoided public arguments. He returned to duty once the county confirmed he had acted correctly throughout, and that the stop created no performance concerns. The sheriff's office issued an internal bulletin using the incident as a training reference. It emphasized 3 points: verification first, de-escalation as default, and immediate supervisor notification when a stop involves government fleet vehicles or cross-agency personnel. The city updated field guidance for patrol. Supervisors were directed to audit stops that escalated without an initial plate check. Officers were required to document verification steps in reports when government vehicles were involved. Joint dispatch coordination on that highway stretch was tightened to reduce jurisdiction confusion. The public response shifted over time from outrage to expectation. People focused less on the viral clip and more on whether consequences matched the conduct. The visible on-scene detention and the later discipline made it harder for the incident to be minimized. For Porter, the change was quieter. He did not frame it as a personal victory. He treated it as a warning about how fast a stop could turn when assumptions replaced procedure, and how important it was to keep the record clean from the first second. Months later, the incident had a paper trail as solid as the video. Porter's complaint closed with sustained findings and documented corrective action. The city's final discipline became part of the officers' internal history and affected their future assignments, supervision level, and eligibility for specialized units. The county and city also finalized operational changes tied directly to what failed that day. Dispatch coordination on that highway corridor was updated. Patrol guidance required plate verification before escalation when the vehicle was not clearly linked to a crime. Supervisors were instructed to respond early when a stop involved government fleet markings or cross-agency personnel. Training was updated with the same sequence the investigation highlighted. Verify first, then decide. Officers were required to document the verification steps in reports, not just the outcome. Body camera review standards were tightened for stops that included hands-on control or searches. Porter did not become a public face of the incident. He kept working. But inside the sheriff's office, the stop became a reference point for younger deputies. Proof that staying calm and keeping the record clean could protect you when someone else tried to control the narrative. The last change was personal. Porter adjusted his habits, even though he had done nothing wrong. He made sure his credentials were always positioned for quick display. He ensured the county fleet identifiers were unobstructed. He treated every stop as if it could become evidence, because he had lived what happened when procedure got replaced by assumption. The incident left a clear lesson behind. Authority without verification creates risk, and cameras don't create truth. They preserve it. If you've ever been in a situation where someone judged you before they checked the facts, what did you do? Did you stay calm, or did it pull you into the argument? Drop your take in the comments. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe for more story times where accountability actually shows up.
Nothing you've said so far convinces me this is really your vehicle, sir.
If you believe there's a legitimate alert, you can run the plate or verify the VIN. I've told you I do not consent to a search. These are my judicial credentials.
You're a judge?
I am. And my rights were the same 5 minutes ago as they are right now.
The luxury SUV had barely settled into the hotel's valet lane when the patrol car cut across the front like a gate swinging shut. A second later, another unit slid in behind, close enough that the judge could see the reflection of its grille in his rearview mirror. The lane became a trap. Curb on one side, concrete planter on the other, two police vehicles boxing him in like they had practiced it. The officer who stepped out moved fast. He approached the driver's door with a hard stance and a hand hovering near his belt, eyes fixed on the badgeless windshield and the polished SUV like it offended him. He told the driver the vehicle matched a stolen vehicle alert. He said the driver needed to step out immediately. He pushed for a search right there in the valet lane, like consent was a formality. Inside the SUV, Judge Darius Whitfield stayed seated. He kept his hands visible near the steering wheel, window down, voice controlled. He asked what the legal basis was. He asked whether he was being detained. He refused a search that wasn't supported by probable cause or a warrant. And he asked, again, for a supervisor. The officer didn't ease up. He repeated the stolen vehicle claim. He leaned in slightly, using the angle of his body to make the moment feel smaller, tighter, private, even though it wasn't, because by then it already had an audience. A valet in a black vest had stopped mid-step, key fob in hand, staring. A couple in conference lanyards turned their phones toward the lane. A guest near the revolving doors raised their camera higher, framing the patrol car, the SUV, and the officer's posture, like a scene they didn't trust anyone to summarize later. And the officer, he noticed the cameras. He just didn't respect them. He talked louder. He acted like the driver was being difficult. He hinted that cooperation would make this easier and that refusal would make it worse. He treated the SUV like evidence before he treated the man inside like a citizen. The man inside wasn't just any citizen. He was a superior court judge, and he knew exactly how quickly a routine stop turned into a headline when ego outran law. Now, real quick, tell everybody where you're watching from. Country, state, city. Drop it in the comments. And if you watch these stories because you care about dignity, rights, and accountability in real life, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Because what happened in that valet lane wasn't just an awkward misunderstanding. It was a live demonstration of how profiling worked in 2025. A pretext, a posture, a demand for compliance, and a gamble that the person being targeted would either panic or hand over their rights to end the tension. Judge Whitfield didn't panic. He didn't hand over anything. And the worst part for the officer was that the judge didn't even raise his voice. The cameras kept rolling, and the footage didn't need commentary to tell the truth. It had started less than 10 minutes earlier, the way most days started for someone who lived by calendars and deadlines. Judge Whitfield had been driving downtown to pick up a colleague, Judge Keisha Monroe, for a legal conference across town. They were both scheduled for the same panel, the kind filled with attorneys, judges, and academics, talking about modern policing, courtroom ethics, and what constitutional rights looked like outside a textbook. It was midday. The hotel was busy in the way downtown hotels always were. Valet whistles, luggage wheels, ride shares, double parking for just 1 second. Conference attendees drifting in clusters with coffee cups and name badges. Whitfield pulled into the drop-off lane like he had done 100 times in 100 places. He didn't cut anyone off. He didn't speed. He didn't roll through a stop sign. He was simply a black man in a high-end SUV arriving at a downtown hotel. That detail mattered, because the officer who boxed him in hadn't come from nowhere. He had been sitting a block away, angled toward traffic, watching the flow of vehicles that belonged to people going somewhere important. When Whitfield's SUV passed, the officer moved, not like someone responding to a confirmed alert, not like someone checking a plate and waiting for confirmation, like someone who had already decided the story in his head and needed the real world to catch up. He followed into the valet lane. He didn't pause to let the valet staff manage the flow. He didn't choose a safe, open spot. He didn't approach like this was uncertain. He chose the box in. To most people, that tactic felt like a statement. You're not going anywhere because I say you're not going anywhere. To Judge Whitfield, it felt like a legal argument happening without a courtroom, where tone was used as evidence and compliance was treated like guilt. He didn't give the officer the reaction he wanted. He stayed in the seat. He kept his hands visible. He didn't rummage for anything. He didn't reach across the console. He didn't step out just because someone with a badge demanded it. He did what experienced attorneys always told people to do, but rarely got to model in real time. He made the officer articulate the reason. The officer didn't like that. So he leaned on a familiar pressure sequence, the kind that worked when the other person was alone and scared. First came the certainty. The vehicle matched a stolen alert. Then came the urgency. The driver needed to step out right now. Then came the implication. If the driver had nothing to hide, he would cooperate. Whitfield held his line. He asked for a supervisor. He refused consent to a search. He asked if he was free to leave. That was the chess move, because once he asked that question, the officer had two options: establish lawful grounds to detain him or back down. The officer chose a third option. He escalated the performance. He widened his stance. He angled his shoulders toward the growing crowd like he wanted an audience on his side. He used the valet lane's chaos to make Whitfield look like the problem holding everything up. But the valet lane wasn't a private street corner. It was a glass-fronted hotel entrance in the middle of the day, and the people watching weren't relying on memory. They were recording. One valet, Jasmine, the lead on shift, lifted her phone and held it steady, not shaky, not emotional, just documenting. A guest near the entrance framed the whole scene from farther back, catching both patrol cars and the SUV, so nobody could later claim there was room to just pull forward. Someone inside the lobby started filming through the glass, capturing the officer's approach from an angle that showed his hand placement, his proximity, his body language. Multiple angles, multiple witnesses, one story. Judge Whitfield knew that the second phones came out. The encounter changed. The officer knew it too. But instead of adjusting, the officer doubled down, because backing down in public felt, to him, like losing. And right there, with cameras rolling and valet staff frozen in place, he let the real message creep through the official one. It wasn't only about a stolen vehicle alert. It was about disbelief. The officer's tone, his emphasis, his stare, the way he kept looking at the SUV and then back at Whitfield, made it clear he didn't believe the man inside belonged behind that wheel. And when Whitfield calmly held his boundary and repeated his request for a supervisor, the officer's patience thinned in front of everyone. The valet lane quieted in that specific way it did when strangers sensed a moment turning, when people stopped pretending not to watch, because everyone could feel it. The officer was about to decide whether this stayed a stop or became a spectacle. And Judge Whitfield was about to decide whether he ended it with paperwork or ended it with proof. The officer tried to break the moment by controlling the smallest things first. He told Judge Whitfield to turn the engine off. He told him to hand over the keys. He told him to step out so they could clear it up. Each instruction was delivered like it was already law, like the badge itself created permission. Whitfield didn't play tug-of-war with commands. He stayed focused on one lane of facts. He asked if he was being detained. He asked what specific information tied his vehicle to a theft beyond a vague match. He repeated that he did not consent to a search. And he requested a supervisor again, calmly, like a metronome. That calm did something that anger never could. It exposed the officer's lack of foundation. Because if the alert was real and specific, the officer could name it, verify it, and proceed by the book. Instead, he leaned into pressure, tone, proximity, speed. He tried to make Whitfield feel like the only way out was obedience. In the valet lane, phones stayed up. Jasmine didn't move. She kept her camera steady at chest height, catching clean audio in the officer's stance. A guest near the doors angled wide to include both patrol cars, the boxed-in SUV, and the line of waiting vehicles stacking behind them. Someone else stepped to the side to capture Whitfield's hands through the open window, visible the whole time. No sudden movements, no reaching. It wasn't dramatic. It was procedural. And procedural footage was exactly what departments feared, because it didn't depend on opinion. The officer switched tactics. He started talking like he was doing Whitfield a favor. He implied that if Whitfield just cooperated, the whole thing would be over in minutes. He framed refusal as suspicious. He tried to turn the crowd into a jury, making it seem like Whitfield was causing a scene by insisting on rights. But the scene already belonged to the officer. He had created it the moment he chose the box-in at a hotel entrance. Whitfield stayed inside the SUV and did the one thing that always made a bluff expensive. He made the officer commit to specifics. He asked whether the officer had run the plate. He asked whether the officer had verified the VIN. He asked for the supervisor's name once they were called. He asked for the incident number. The officer didn't like being steered into details. He leaned closer to the window, lowering his voice as if he wanted to make it personal, then raising it again when he wanted the crowd to hear. He kept glancing at the cameras, then acting like they weren't there. And that's when the mask slipped. Not with a slur, not with something he could deny as a misunderstanding, with a simple insistence that revealed the real belief underneath the pretext, that the man in the driver's seat didn't match the picture in his head of who belonged in a luxury SUV. He made it about ownership instead of evidence. He pushed the idea that the vehicle wasn't really Whitfield's, that something about him didn't add up. He treated the SUV like a prize that needed a rightful owner, and treated Whitfield like a placeholder until proven otherwise. The valet lane tightened. A couple of people who had been casually filming adjusted their posture, not for better video, because they felt the shift from routine to ugly. Even the valet staff, used to dealing with entitled guests and impatient drivers, looked like they'd stepped into something they couldn't unsee. Whitfield didn't flinch. He didn't debate identity. He didn't argue lifestyle. He didn't start explaining his life to earn basic respect. He stayed on the law. He told the officer he was requesting a supervisor and that he would not be searched without a lawful basis. He asked again if he was free to leave. The officer tried to hold the lane hostage. He positioned his body so the SUV couldn't pull out without risking contact. He let the backed-up cars and irritated honks become part of the pressure. He let the delay paint Whitfield as the cause. But cameras don't care who's impatient. They care who's responsible. Whitfield watched the officer's posture, watched the crowd, watched the way the officer's partner, standing near the rear, looked uncertain, shifting weight, scanning phones, aware that the narrative was being captured in real time. Whitfield also knew something else. This kind of encounter could turn dangerous fast if it became a pride contest. So he chose the cleanest exit, not for his ego, for his safety, for the record. He reached slowly, very slowly toward his inner jacket pocket, narrating his movement with calm precision so there could be no, he reached for something later. He pulled out a slim wallet, opened it, and presented an official judicial identification. He didn't thrust it. He didn't flash it like a weapon. He displayed it like a fact. The officer's whole demeanor changed in a single beat. His shoulders loosened, his voice softened. The aggressive certainty melted into a careful politeness that would have been almost comical if it wasn't being captured from 4 angles. He suddenly acted like this was a minor mix-up. He suddenly acted like he had been trying to protect the public. He suddenly acted like he respected the man he had just tried to intimidate. And that flip, clean, instant, undeniable, became the second turning point of the day, because it proved what Whitfield couldn't force anyone to admit with words. The officer's reasonable suspicion was flexible. It wasn't anchored to data. It was anchored to who he thought he was dealing with. The crowd reacted without speaking. You could see it in the way phones held steadier, not lower. In the way people kept recording even after the respectful voice appeared, because they understood the respectful voice was the performance. A patrol supervisor's voice finally cut into the scene as Sergeant Elena Rivera arrived, stepping in with the posture of someone who could feel the disaster before she'd even heard the first sentence. She asked what happened. She asked for verification details. She asked why the stop was initiated here, in a valet lane, with a box in, without a clear confirmation. The officer tried to summarize quickly, carefully now, choosing words that would sound reasonable on playback. He referenced a vague match. He implied he had been following protocol. Rivera looked at the ID, then she looked at the officer. Then she looked at the phones. And she did what supervisors did when they knew the department was about to be judged by the public. She took control. She directed the officer to step back. She spoke to Whitfield with professional respect. She confirmed there would be no search. She began untangling the vehicles so the valet lane could function again. Whitfield stayed composed. He didn't take victory laps. He didn't lecture. He simply recentered the moment where it belonged, in rights, not reactions. Before the SUVs and cruisers separated, he gave one final statement, calm, measured, and clear, that would later become the caption under a dozen viral clips. The idea that constitutional protections didn't shift based on someone's assumptions. Then he drove forward the few feet to the valet stand, exactly where he had intended to stop in the first place. Inside the hotel lobby, Judge Keisha Monroe had seen enough through the glass to know this wasn't a traffic issue. When she stepped out to meet Whitfield, her expression wasn't surprised. It was familiar. And that familiarity, two judges, both seasoned, both unshaken, both recognizing the script, was the quiet detail that made what happened next inevitable. Because the footage didn't end when the cruisers moved, that night it found the internet. And the internet did what it always did when it smelled a cover story forming. It started pulling receipts. That night, the valet lane videos didn't spread slowly. They spread like gasoline. One clip showed the box in from the wide angle. 2 patrol cars sealing the SUV in a space that wasn't even a roadway stop. Another clip had clean audio from the valet's phone, catching the officer's stolen vehicle pretext, and the way his focus kept circling back to whether the driver made sense in that car. A third angle, shot through the lobby glass, captured the instant change in the officer's posture after the judicial ID appeared. By midnight, people weren't debating what happened. They were comparing angles. By morning, local attorneys and community advocates were posting side by sides, before the ID, after the ID. The difference was so sharp it became the whole story. Not the SUV, not the hotel, the switch. Then, the pattern work began. Viewers started tagging old posts and filing public records requests. Former complainants recognized the officer's name and badge number. Past stops surfaced with the same familiar structure. An alert claim that never quite became verifiable. An aggressive demand for consent. And a tone that escalated when drivers didn't submit fast enough. News outlets picked it up because it had everything they could verify. Multiple witness videos, a crowded public setting, and a public official who stayed measured the entire time. The department released a short statement that tried to frame it as a routine stop based on a vehicle match. Careful language, minimal detail. But the receipts forced detail. Dispatch logs became a question. If there had been an active stolen vehicle alert, there would be timestamps, confirmations, identifiers. Investigators looked at whether any alert actually existed at that moment, whether the plate had been run before the box-in, and whether the match was the kind that justified an immediate high-risk containment in a valet lane full of pedestrians. Internal Affairs opened a formal investigation. The body-worn camera footage became critical, not just for what it showed, but for what it proved about decision-making. Supervisors were asked why a pattern of complaints hadn't triggered earlier intervention. Training records were reviewed. Prior stops were audited for the same pretext first, facts later approach. And Judge Whitfield didn't turn it into a speech tour. He did what he'd spent his career watching other people do. He documented preserved evidence and moved it into a legal process that didn't depend on public outrage to stay alive. Within weeks, a civil rights lawsuit followed. focused on unlawful detention tactics, attempted search without proper basis, and discriminatory treatment. The hotel preserved its security footage. Witness statements came in from valets, guests, and conference attendees. The lawsuit didn't need dramatic language. It had something stronger: consistent video, consistent procedure, and a consistent pattern. The officer was placed under scrutiny, then pulled from street duty. As more reviewed stops came back questionable, the department's posture shifted from denial to damage control. Eventually, the officer was terminated. The city moved towards settlement rather than risk a trial that would put every disputed stop under a courtroom spotlight. The settlement was substantial, and it came with reforms the department couldn't quietly ignore: revised policies on vehicle alert verification, stricter reporting requirements before containment tactics, clearer supervisor response rules, and department-wide retraining centered on Fourth Amendment limits, bias recognition, and de-escalation in public spaces. For Judge Whitfield, the outcome wasn't about winning an argument. It was about making sure the next person didn't have to survive the same mistaken suspicion to prove they belonged. And for everyone who watched it happen from a hotel sidewalk, or later from a phone screen, the lesson was simple: calm boundaries plus documentation could beat intimidation, especially when oversight had something real to review. If you ever end up in a situation where someone's authority is pushing past your rights, what would you do? Comply to end it fast, or hold the line and insist on procedure? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this with someone who needs the reminder, and subscribe for more story times where accountability actually catches up.
Okay, I'm recording for my safety. I'm in the parking lot at the plaza, and this woman is blocking my car.
Don't come near me! Stop threatening me!
You're blocking the exit.
Somebody help! She's trying to attack me!
Imani was trying to go home. Instead, she got pinned in by a stranger who decided she wasn't going anywhere. A white woman blocked her car, called the police like it was a weapon, and started performing fear for anyone watching. While Imani did the only smart thing: she made sure the truth was on record. Because here's the thing about moments like this: the person who stays calm doesn't always win in real time. The person with the better story does. And in that parking lot, somebody was already writing a story out loud. Now, before we rewind, comment where you're watching from, your city or state. And if you're into stories where accountability only happens because someone stayed level-headed and kept receipts, hit like and subscribe. These situations happen fast and the details matter. All right, let's back up. Imani Brooks wasn't a loud person. Early 30s, steady job, the kind of woman who handled business and kept moving. She didn't go looking for conflict, and she wasn't interested in proving herself to strangers in public. But she did have one rule she lived by: if something felt off, she documented it. Not because she was paranoid, because she'd seen how quick off could turn into official. That day started normal. A busy shopping plaza, midday traffic, people circling for spots like it was a competition. The lot had that constant hum: engines crawling, shopping carts rattling. Somebody always half stopped in the lane with their blinker on, like that meant they owned the pavement. Imani ran in for a quick errand and came back out already thinking about her next stop. She wasn't distracted, though. She noticed details. She noticed who was rushing, who was impatient, who was cutting corners. And she noticed the white woman before anything even happened, because the woman's energy didn't match the moment. Not lost, not wandering, not looking for her car. Looking at Imani. At first, it read like the usual parking lot attitude. The little stare that people do when they want you to feel like you're in their way. Imani didn't bite. She got into her car like any other person would, shut the door, and took a breath before pulling out. That should have been the end of it. But the woman made it something else. She stepped into the lane behind Imani's car, not crossing through, stopping there, like she was placing herself in the path on purpose. And then her SUV rolled into position 2, angled just enough to block the exit without fully ramming in. It was calculated. A move meant to trap, not crash. Imani paused, trying to process the logic. People honked over less. People screamed over less. But physically blocking someone from leaving? That wasn't just rude, that was a control. And control's the whole point. The woman didn't act embarrassed. She didn't wave it off like she'd made a mistake. She acted like she had authority, like she was doing something justified, and everybody else needed to accept it. Imani stayed inside the car. That choice mattered. She didn't give the woman a scene. She didn't give her closeness. She didn't give her a frame where the story could become, I felt threatened. Instead, Imani reached for her phone and started recording. Not dramatically, not for attention, like someone making a record because she could already see where this was headed. The woman started talking, loud enough for nearby people to hear. She framed herself as the one who needed help. She insisted police were on the way. She repeated that she needed them there immediately, like repeating it made her decision more legitimate. And then came the performance. The part that wasn't about facts. It was about roles. The woman kept presenting herself as afraid, even while she stayed planted behind Imani's car, even while she refused to move, even while she escalated the tension and drew an audience. That contradiction is what made Imani's stomach drop, because Imani knew how that script worked. If police arrived to a scene where a white woman was loudly claiming fear and a black woman was frustrated, the public often didn't ask who started it. They asked who looked like the problem. The story could become dangerous in seconds, especially if there wasn't proof. So Imani stayed calm on purpose. She didn't plead. She didn't insult. She didn't match the woman's volume. She described what was happening like it was going into evidence. She kept it simple. She was being blocked. She was trying to leave. She needed the woman to move her vehicle. And you could feel, even in the way the bystanders reacted, that something wasn't sitting right. People weren't rushing to help the woman who was claiming fear. They were watching the woman who was blocking a car, like she owned the exit. A guy with a cart slowed down and hovered. A couple near the storefront stopped and pretended to check their bags while they listened. Someone across the row lifted a phone, not to take a selfie, but to capture what looked like a situation that might flip. And in the middle of that parking lot, it started turning into a public record. The woman kept warning Imani about consequences without saying the word out loud. She kept acting like any movement towards her car would be an attack, even though she was the one holding the exit hostage. She kept setting the stage for what she planned to tell officers when they got there. Imani didn't let her have that stage uncontested. She kept her tone controlled and her wording precise. She treated it like a chess match. Every sentence was a piece moved carefully, so it couldn't be twisted later. Every calm moment was a shield. The woman didn't just block Imani in and stand there quietly. She worked the moment. She kept her voice loud enough to travel, the way people did when they wanted witnesses before they wanted facts. She made sure anyone walking past heard the same message on repeat. Police were coming, police needed to handle it. She wasn't moving until they arrived. And then she added the ingredient that always changed how strangers reacted. She started presenting herself as afraid. Not afraid in a private, believable way. Afraid in a public, performative way. The kind of fear that wasn't about safety, it was about positioning. The kind of fear that turned a person into the victim before anyone even knew what happened. Imani clocked it immediately. That's why she didn't yell back. She didn't trade insults. She didn't get out of the car and give the situation a physical frame. She stayed seated, window cracked just enough to be heard, phone up, and she kept describing the reality in plain language. Her exit was blocked. She was being prevented from leaving, and she was asking to go. It sounded boring on purpose. Boring is hard to twist. The blocker didn't like that. She tried a different tactic. Bait. She edged closer to Imani's driver's side window, acting like she wanted a face-to-face argument. She talked over Imani's words, tried to turn it into a back and forth. She kept looking around between sentences like she was checking to see who was watching and what they believed. Imani didn't step into it. She kept forcing the same simple question into the air. If the woman was truly scared, why was she the one trapping someone in a parking lot? Why was she still standing there instead of moving away? Why was the fear only showing up as soon as police were mentioned? That question did something. It made the performance wobble. Because suddenly, the woman had to hold two stories at the same time. She was terrified, but she was also the one choosing to stay, choose to block, choose to control. And the more Imani kept that contradiction on record, the more uncomfortable the crowd got. A guy loading groceries into a trunk slowed down and kept watching. A woman with earbuds took one out and didn't put it back. The student across the row, Zoe, quietly angled her phone and started filming from a distance without saying a word. She didn't want attention. She wanted proof. That second camera mattered more than anyone realized, because the blocker started testing boundaries. She warned Imani not to come near her SUV. She framed the SUV like it was sacred property, and framed Imani like she was already guilty of something she hadn't done. She made it clear that if Imani got out, if she took a step, if she moved wrong, she was ready to say it was an attack. It was preloaded, like she'd rehearsed the line. Imani didn't flinch. She answered the way somebody answered when they understood the real danger wasn't the parking lot. It was the police report. She told the woman in a flat, almost tired way that blocking someone's car and refusing to let them leave wasn't just rude, it was illegal. And when officers got there, the person who set this up was going to be the one in trouble. That's when the blocker's tone sharpened. She didn't back off. She didn't move her vehicle even a foot. Instead, she started threatening consequences again, without saying exactly what she meant. It was the same message over and over. Don't test me. Don't come close. Don't try anything. And right there, you could see the chess game. Imani was playing defense with facts and distance. The blocker was playing offense with implication. It wasn't even about Imani anymore. It was about control, about proving she could hold a stranger in place and make the system show up on her terms. A nearby employee, Mr. Patel, from one of the storefronts, finally walked over. Not aggressive, not confrontational, just cautious, like he didn't want to be the next target in somebody's story. He asked what was going on and looked from the SUV to Imani's car, then back to the woman. The blocker tried to pull him into her narrative, repeating that she was waiting for police and that she felt threatened. But Mr. Patel did what a lot of people do when they can see a situation with their own eyes. He didn't argue feelings. He pointed at reality. He asked why. If she was scared, she was standing there and keeping someone from leaving. He told her she needed to move her car and let the driver out, and the blocker didn't like hearing that from him, because it hit different when it wasn't the angry black woman saying it. Imani noticed that too. She didn't celebrate it, and she just kept filming, kept her voice steady, kept repeating the same request, kept building a clean timeline. She wanted to exit. The other driver refused. The crowd was now watching it happen. That's when the blocker tried her most dangerous move. She started acting like the recording itself was the problem. She told Imani to stop filming. She spoke about the phone like it was harassment, like evidence was aggression. But in 2025, in a parking lot full of strangers, that demand didn't land like she thought it would. It landed like guilt. Zoe's camera stayed up. Another person across the lane lifted theirs too. It wasn't a mob. It wasn't chaos. It was oversight. And the blocker felt it. So she got louder. She kept returning to the same script. Police were coming. She needed them now. She was afraid, while still refusing to move the SUV even an inch. The contradiction got sharper each time she repeated it. Imani's tone never changed. That was the flex. She stayed in the car. She stayed composed. She stayed factual. And when the blocker threw out another warning about what would happen if Imani got near the SUV, Imani delivered the line that made a few bystanders glance at each other like, yeah, she's right. Imani told her she was the one about to end up in jail, not as a threat, as a prediction. Because at that point, it wasn't just Imani's word against hers. It was on camera, from more than one angle. And the parking lot had stopped being a private dispute. It had become a public record, waiting for officers to arrive and decide who they believed. When the police pulled into the plaza, the whole dynamic shifted, because now it wasn't just a parking lot standoff. It was a race to be believed first. The woman who'd blocked Imani in immediately tried to take control of the conversation. She positioned herself as the one needing help, leaned hard into the idea that she felt threatened, and talked with the kind of urgency that made strangers assume there had to be a reason. Imani didn't compete for drama. She stayed measured and kept everything anchored to one fact. She had been prevented from leaving. She explained it as a timeline, not an argument. How she tried to exit, how her path was blocked, how she asked repeatedly to be let go, and how the other woman refused, while insisting police were the solution. That difference mattered, because officers heard fear claims all the time. But they also recognized when someone was trying to steer the outcome before anyone looked at the actual scene. And this scene was simple if you weren't distracted. One car was trapped, one car was positioned to keep it that way, and a crowd had gathered because it didn't look normal. What the blocker didn't expect was that Imani wasn't alone in documenting it. Bystanders had been watching. At least one person had filmed from a second angle. A nearby employee had seen enough to speak up. The situation had witnesses who weren't invested in either person's ego, only in what they saw. So when the blocker tried to switch the focus to accusations and consequences, it didn't land the way it usually did. Too many people had already seen the setup. And the moment that really broke her momentum was when the recording became part of the conversation. Because once an officer asked to see what had been captured, the dispute stopped being about who sounded more convincing. It became about what actually happened. Imani's video showed the part that mattered most. She stayed contained. She tried to leave. She kept asking for space. And the other woman used her vehicle, and the threat of police, as leverage to keep control. It undercut the "I was terrified" act in the simplest way possible. It made the contradiction visible. After that, the officer's tone changed. Not dramatic, not emotional, just more specific, more procedural, more focused on the fact that blocking someone from leaving wasn't a normal disagreement. It was a choice. And with witnesses backing up what the video showed, the blocker's strategy started collapsing in real time. By the end of the interaction, Imani wasn't scrambling to defend herself anymore. She was just letting the record speak. The woman who came in expecting to run the situation with fear and authority was now stuck explaining why she created it in the first place. Once the officer had the basic picture, the standoff stopped being a "he said, she said" situation and turned into a paperwork situation, the kind that doesn't care about performance. The first thing that changed was control. The officer directed the blocker to move her vehicle and clear the exit, not as a suggestion, as an instruction. And when she hesitated, still trying to hold on to that last bit of power, the officer's tone got sharper, the way it did when someone kept resisting a simple, lawful order in public. Imani stayed put until it was handled. She didn't peel off the second she had space, because she understood what leaving too quickly could look like. She did the opposite of what the blocker expected. She stayed calm and stayed available, like someone who had nothing to hide. Then came the part that mattered more than the argument ever did: statements. The officer separated people and started collecting names and quick summaries. A store employee confirmed what he saw. A bystander confirmed they filmed from a different angle. The crowd that had formed wasn't a cheering section. It was a record. And that's what changed the outcome. Because now the blocker couldn't rely on tone and tears alone. She had to match the timeline. And she couldn't. She tried to pivot. She tried to make it about feeling unsafe. She tried to make the phone recording sound like provocation. She tried to act like the whole thing was an accident or a misunderstanding, but there's a problem with using a car as a weapon and then calling it fear. Vehicles don't accidentally trap someone at that angle, and witnesses don't accidentally see you refuse to move for several minutes. The officer's questions narrowed. They got less emotional and more mechanical. Why she placed her SUV there. Why she didn't simply let the other driver leave. Why she insisted on police while also claiming she was afraid. And why she escalated it in front of a crowd. And when the blocker's answers kept slipping into vague accusations instead of facts, the officer treated it like what it was: disorderly behavior that created a public disturbance, plus a deliberate act that restricted another person's movement. That's when consequences started showing up. Not a dramatic movie arrest scene, not a big speech, just real-world accountability. Warnings turning into citations, refusal turning into documentation, a situation being recorded in a way that followed the blocker after the parking lot. Imani walked away from that moment with something most people never get in situations like this: confirmation on the record that she was the one who tried to leave, not the one who tried to control. She didn't win because she shouted louder. She won because she stayed disciplined long enough for the truth to get captured by more than one camera. And the blocker, she left without the victory she came for. She didn't get to keep Imani trapped. She didn't get a clean story where she was the hero. And now she had an officer, witnesses, and multiple videos attached to her name. In other words, the parking lot ended, but the accountability didn't. Within hours, the video was everywhere. It didn't need captions to make sense. People could see the setup: one person trying to leave, one person using a car, and a police call to control the moment. And once the clip hit social media, the comments all circled the same point. This wasn't fear, it was strategy. Commentators broke it down like a pattern, weaponizing panic, using police as leverage, and trying to flip the story the second things didn't go her way. The phrase, "classic Karen," came up fast. But the real takeaway was sharper than a label. If Imani hadn't recorded, the story could have gone the other way. And that's what made it stick. Not the drama. The reminder that cameras are sometimes the only reason the truth survives the first version of events. After the parking lot cleared, the real consequences didn't happen in the moment. They happened in the follow-up. Because once multiple videos existed, the blocker couldn't quietly re-explain what happened later. The timeline was locked. The witnesses were real. And the claim of fear didn't match the behavior that started everything: using a vehicle to restrict someone's movement and refusing to let them leave. In the days that followed, what started as a public standoff turned into official steps. Reports got reviewed with footage attached. The store management got involved because the incident happened on their property and drew a crowd. And the blocker, who had tried to turn the police into a pressure tactic, ended up dealing with the kind of accountability that doesn't disappear when the cameras stop. Citations, restrictions from the plaza, and the possibility of further legal trouble if she doubled down with false claims. Imani, on the other hand, walked away with something most people don't get after a situation like that: validation on record. Not just she said, but proof that she stayed controlled and tried to leave while someone else escalated. And that changed her afterward. Not in some dramatic movie way, just in the quiet way real people change when they realize something important. You can be calm, you can be polite, and someone can still try to turn you into a threat if it benefits them. The answer isn't to become louder. The answer is to become prepared. That's the lesson here. Power doesn't always look like shouting. Sometimes power looks like blocking a car, calling the police, and performing fear to make the system arrive, already leaning your way. And accountability doesn't always look like instant justice. Sometimes accountability looks like a phone held steady, a timeline stated clearly, witnesses who don't look away, and a record that makes it impossible for a lie to become the official version. So let me ask you, what would you have done if you were Imani? Would you have stayed in the car and recorded? Or would you have gotten out and risked giving someone the moment they wanted? And have you ever seen somebody try to use fear like a weapon in public? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this with someone who needs the reminder, and subscribe for more story times like this. Because the next situation could happen to anyone, and the receipts are what protect you.